Imagine this, you're standing in a quiet city street just before dawn, the lamps are still glowing, the world hasn't quite woken up, and then, somewhere far off, a single radio crackles to life, a few coded words ride the static, and in that moment, fate bends. This isn't just the beginning of a war, it's the start of millions of choices, big and small, that will tilt the planet off its axis. Stay with me, because at the very end, I'll reveal an overlooked decision, barely a sliver of time, that help decide who would write history. We tend to picture World War II as maps and arrows, steel and smoke, but it actually starts with hunger, pride, debt, and fear. The Great War ended, but it didn't finish. Treaties and promises were ink on damp paper, nations limped, economies buckled, and anger found a megaphone. When one man shouted loud enough, desperate crowds mistook volume for vision. That's how a continent slides, not with a leap, but with a shuffle, one excuse, one rumor, one clenched fist at a time. Germany wasn't just rearming, it was reinventing the tempo of conflict. Blitzkrieg wasn't magic, it was rhythm, planes, tanks, radios, and math working together like a drumline you can't outrun. In a world that expected slow trenches, fast thunder was terrifying. As borders cracked like thin ice, people fled with whatever they could carry, sometimes just a name scrawled on a tag and a hope folded into a pocket. Britain watched the storm build, listening for a sky that might never clear. France braced behind concrete and confidence, only to learn that steel doesn't stop ideas. Across Europe, whispers turned into sirens, and in quiet rooms, someone rolled a map open and traced a finger along a coastline, calculating the unthinkable. Wars don't really start with declarations, they ignite with assumptions. One assumption was that no one would dare, another was that tomorrow would be safer than today. But the fuse was already lit, winding through halls of power, down factory floors, across rail yards, into schoolyards, and then the world went to war. Listen to a soldier's first night. He's not thinking about grand strategies, he's thinking, where's my friend? Where's my water? Where am I supposed to point this rifle? The ground is cold, the helmet is heavy, and the fear is a weight you can't share. He is one thread in a tapestry too vast to see, yet tug that thread, and an entire front shifts. Civilians did not stand on the sidelines, they lived on the battlefield's shadow. Blackout curtains, sleepless nights in underground stations, a letter that takes weeks to arrive, and when it does, it weighs less than the news it carries. Children counting the seconds between the siren and the distant thump they pray never comes closer. Faith became rationed, hope was a coupon you saved for a future you weren't sure would come. Meanwhile, resistance moved where spotlights couldn't, a courier on a bicycle, a farmer hiding papers under bread, a clerk memorizing train timetables not because he loves schedules, but because every line might be a life. Courage, in this war, was often quiet, but the quiet acts add up. Across the oceans, another rhythm, carriers, decks, aircraft that fold like knives into pockets of steel. Strategy is inscrutable until it suddenly makes sense, like a code that clicks and the message flips from nonsense into a razor. Naval battles were chess played in storms, queens with wings, rooks with propellers, pawns with torpedoes. Oceans became corridors, islands became keys in doors never meant for locks. But let's slow down and look closer at the machinery of war, factories beating like mechanical hearts, trains and trucks carrying blood and iron. Wars are won with logistics, and logistics must fight time itself. A shell that arrives too late is just a paperweight in a crater. A tank without fuel is a fortress that forgot how to move. A commander without reliable maps is a poet reciting to an empty room. And somewhere in the background, mathematicians and linguists wage a different kind of battle, turning secrecy into patterns, patterns into predictions, and predictions into survival. Cryptography is the art of listening without being heard. To break a code isn't to guess a word, it's to learn the speaker's breath. People imagine spies in tuxedos, but the most dangerous weapon in this war might have been a pencil and a mind obsessed with details. Break one day's code, save one convoy, break the months, tilt an ocean. The air war turned cities into targets and clouds into cover. Pilots measured life in fuel and seconds. Bombardiers measured it in lines drawn through crosshairs. On the ground, families measured it in footsteps to the shelter and the long walk back. Out, who wins a war from the sky? No one does, until the ground follows, with boots and bandages and flags, and then everyone loses something they can't name. If you want to understand how a war consumes the world, follow the food, follow the wheat turning into bread, the bread into energy, the energy into labor, and the labor into ships and planes and whatever it takes to keep the dawn from bringing the wrong flag to the town square. Follow the coal, follow the oil, Follow the ship slipping through night, escorted by destroyers. Scanning for wolves, follow the telegraphs tapping in tedious rhythms, because boredom is just the skin that luck wears. In every capital, leaders try to read the future like tea leaves. Do we strike here? Delay there? Gamble, hedge, bluff? Some gambles pay off, some bury themselves in snow. Winter is not neutral, it chooses sides quietly, dulling engines, hardening soil, testing boots and willpower. A plan that looks crisp on paper becomes ink smeared in sleet. Armies discover that distance is a weapon, supply lines are veins, freeze them, and the limb goes numb. All the while, propaganda paints certainties where none exist. Posters promise that victory is inevitable, that sacrifice is noble, that the enemy is monstrous and you are pure. But the truth limps in muddy boots. Victory is negotiable, sacrifice is complicated, and the enemy is often a mirror we're terrified to look into. War forces choices. Some are heroic, some are unforgivable, most are simply human and therefore messy. Let me tell you about a crossroads, literal and moral, a small town with a name you've never heard, a bridge no wider than a bus, a handful of defenders who can't possibly hold, and attackers who can't afford to be delayed. A few hours gained there reshape a whole week's campaign. Multiply that by 100 small towns, 1,000 small bridges, and you start to see how a global conflict often hinges on places that never make it into the textbooks. Technology advances because necessity threatens. Engineers sketch solutions at midnight, grease-stained and exhausted. Someone invents a better pump, someone else refines a sight. Radio sets shrink, tanks breathe better, aircraft stop being made of yesterday's answers, and on the other side of the front, different engineers do the same. War is a conversation between rival ideas, conducted at high volume and paid for in blood. We can't ignore the darkest rooms. Camps turn human beings into numbers and numbers into ash. Laws are twisted until they scream. Records are kept with the precision of bureaucrats who have replaced conscience with procedure. It is not enough to win battles if we forget what was lost in those places. Memory is a duty. Count the names, speak them, carry them forward. Back on the front, a letter home. I'm okay. He isn't. He is scared. He is cold. He hasn't slept properly in ages. But he is trying to be the person his family needs him to be, because wars run on morale as much as on gasoline. In a trench, he trades chocolate for a dry match. In a foxhole, he finds out that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to keep moving while fear sits on your chest. Here's the quiet math of strategy. If you keep the enemy guessing, you make them slow. If you make them slow, you gain time. If you gain time, you save lives, sometimes thousands, sometimes just one. Either way, time becomes a weapon sharper than steel. Deception feasts on certainty. A false radio message, a phantom division, a map that lies just enough. Wars are decided by who sees reality soonest, and who can make the other side see a mirage. Across allied tables, personalities collide, generals and admirals, each with a blueprint and an ego. Arguments last into the next morning, fueled by coffee and stubbornness. You'd think a war is won by consensus. It isn't. It's won by alignment that arrives just in time and holds just long enough to squeeze through a door before it slams shut. And then comes the planning that will define a generation. How to cross a hostile shore, how to shatter a fortress line, how to keep a secret that is big enough to hide the moon. Preparation becomes ritual. Weather forecasts rise to the rank of prophecy. Every tide chart is read like scripture. Every shoreline photo is a riddle. Men study the sand as if it were an enemy general. Pause here with me. Imagine the night before a decisive crossing. The sea is a living thing under the hull. The air tastes like metal and salt. Somewhere, a chaplain whispers. Somewhere else, a mechanic tightens a bolt that will never be thanked but might save a life. And overhead, clouds breed doubt. If the weather turns, everything could unravel. If it holds, history moves. Far away, code breakers listen. Meteorologists argue with the sky. Politicians stare into silence. The decision will come down to a few words: go or wait. And that's the thread I promised you at the beginning, the sliver of time. The overlooked decision that helps decide whose boots first print an occupied beach and how many of those boots will make it past the waterline. But before we pull that thread, remember this: wars aren't only won when flags are raised, they are won in classrooms the year before, in factories at midnight, in shipyards and farms and crowded kitchens where every scrap is stretched. They are won by nurses who refuse to give up, by sailors who outlast the dark, by partisans who pass a note at the exact right moment, by a radio operator who double-checks a frequency and hears the difference between a friendly call sign and a trap. Now, the thread, a room with maps, barometers, and too few hours, advisors disagree. The sky changes its mind minute by minute. If you gamble wrong, you send thousands into a storm that will peel the paint off history. If you gamble right, you slip through a window so narrow it's nearly invisible. That window is coming, that call is coming, and when it's made, it will look like a coin flip to everyone who wasn't there, but to the people in that room, it's the end of 1,000 calculations. Hold that breath, because when the order finally goes, it sends ripples out, down ladders, across decks, into the surf, up the beaches, through the hedgerows, across roads choked with smoke and fear. Every sailor, soldier, airman, and medic becomes part of a sentence that started years earlier with a broken piece and is now racing toward a full stop written in. Liberation. Don't let the scale blind you to the faces. A medic kneels in sand because that's where the wound is. A radio man cups his hand because the wind steals words. A private who promised his mother he'd come home learns that promises and reality don't always agree, but he keeps moving anyway because someone behind him is counting on that movement, and somewhere in the chaos, the plan is holding, not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough. In the end, wars finish the way they start, with people. A signature can end a campaign, a handshake can begin a reconstruction, a courtroom can tell the world what it must never forget. Victory parades try to make sense of costs that don't fit on banners. Mothers and fathers learn how absence occupies a chair. Survivors teach their children the difference between remembering and reliving. So here's the reveal I promised. The turning point you rarely hear about wasn't a single bomb or a single bullet. It was a single pause, a pause granted by a forecast and seized by a commander, the space between two storms that opened a door and let an army walk through it. In the story of this war, the most valuable resource wasn't steel or oil or gold, it was a handful of hours when the clouds stepped aside and said, if you're brave enough, go now. If this journey gripped you, if you want more untold threads, more hidden forecasts, more everyday choices that changed everything, tell me what you want to explore next. Was it the code breakers? The supply lines? The resistance cells that survived on cigarettes and secrets? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me which story you want first, and if you felt that pause, the one that changed the world, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Your comment might decide the very next story we unravel together. The window opened, and an armada slipped through it like a key through a lock, but the story doesn't end on the shoreline, it fans inward, down hedgerow lanes where the air itself feels narrow. Every farmhouse is a question mark, every crossroad, an argument. You can feel time stretching and snapping back, as if the day itself is a rubber band tugged by both sides. Listen closely and you can hear a strange chorus behind the gunfire. It's the clatter of typewriters, the murmur of actors practicing lines they'll never perform on a stage. Deception is theater without applause. 1,000 false signals swim across the air. A phantom army rents the coastline, complete with inflatable tanks that bruise the grass but leave no tracks, and radio nets that talk to no one and convince everyone. We call it trickery, history calls it economy. If you can make the enemy fight a ghost, you don't have to feed that ghost, or bury it. Far east, a different sea keeps its secrets poorly. Carriers trade squadrons like dueling pianos. Somewhere on a swaying deck, a crewman chalks a last-minute change on a board with hands that will not stop shaking. Codes flicker across paper. A commander reads numbers and hears music. One misread digit is a disaster. One correctly guessed habit is a door kicked open by logic. Intelligence sounds glamorous until you realize it's built on patience so intense it borders on devotion. The same file, the same call sign, the same innocuous weather report, until the pattern suddenly stops being wallpaper and becomes a map. Down on the ground, navies and air forces look like gods until they don't. Mud defeats everyone equally. Engines inhale dust and cough up silence. Men lug crates because trucks break at the worst possible moment by some law of mechanical spite. Logistics is the spine of any army. Crack it, and the limbs go numb. A train arrives with boots but not the socks. Fuel comes with filters that don't fit. 1,000 trivial problems form a single serious one. Wars are mosaics made of tiny tiles, each almost meaningless, together undeniable. In a besieged city, time is measured in bread, a loaf is a calendar, a potato is a promise of tomorrow. You learn to listen to silence as if it were a language. Silence in the streets means the shells are walking in from far away. Silence in the stairwell means a family has nothing left to argue about. In the coldest months, the city eats memories. People give their last heirlooms to the fire and call the smoke by the names of their grandparents. You endure, not because endurance is noble, but because the alternative is a sentence you refuse to pronounce. Across a frozen front, steel meets weather. and loses. Wheels forget how to be circles, oil decides it will not flow today, a soldier's breath becomes a visible clock he can't stop checking, the map says the forest is thin, the forest says the map is a liar. The first casualty in winter is the plan. And the second is the illusion that you are in charge of anything larger than your next 30 steps, and yet those 30 steps, forwards, sideways, backwards, sometimes simply in place, add up to lines that bend and lines that break. Meanwhile, in a country cottage that looks like it should smell of tea and apples, the air smells like rubber, electricity, and burned midnight. Rooms full of chalkboards and cables transform secrets into statistics. No one here ever fires a weapon, they fire probabilities, and when they're right, ships live, when they're wrong, ships vanish into coordinates that families will stare at on kitchen tables as if latitude and longitude were spells that could resurrect. The people here do not ask for medals, they ask for more chalk and another pot of coffee. If you want to see the war circuitry, follow the couriers, a girl with a satchel and a laugh that convinces guards she's harmless, a priest with a hollowed-out hymnal, a butcher who's weekly deliveries always take 5 minutes too long because 5 minutes is just enough to photocopy a page. These are not superheroes, they are stubborn people who decided that fear would not get the final vote. Their weapons are the sorts of objects you could leave on a kitchen counter without anyone noticing, a stamp, a ribbon, a spool of thread whose interior is not thread at all. They do not ask if they will be remembered, they ask where to go next. And then there are the factories. Imagine a roof that stretches so wide you swear the weather changes halfway through. Inside, riveters, welders, machinists, a million hands teaching metal to become something else. The clock is not a circle here, it's a conveyor belt. The night shift knows that daylight is a rumor. In these places, mistakes are prayers. Let that crack be cosmetic, let that bolt hold, let that wing forgive me. Later, far away, a pilot pulls up from a dive and never once knows the name of the person whose steady wrist made the instrument panel true. That doesn't matter to the panel, it holds anyway. Let's visit a bridge the maps never bothered to name. Engineers counted on it, planners ignored it, locals painted it once every 3 years because that's what you do when wood remembers rain. Now it's the hinge of a counterattack no one can afford to botch. A single explosive charge placed correctly turns days of enemy preparation into a sigh. Place it wrong, and all you've done is announce yourself. The man with the detonator whispers to the planks like he's meeting an old friend. He asks the river for quiet. He gets just enough. Over an occupied border, a radio finds its voice and then loses it again. Drowned by static the enemy hopes is demoralizing but is actually reassuring. Static means the laws of physics haven't picked a side. The operator taps out a greeting no stranger would understand. On the other end, a reply comes back that isn't a word so much as a nod. That nod will send a team into a valley tomorrow, or cancel a mission that would have gone wrong. We like our heroes loud, but this war has a soft voice and impeccable timing. Leadership is less about speeches than about silence, and what you make it mean. A general looks at a wall of pins and knows that none of those pins bleed. He also knows the men they stand for do. He argues with maps the way men argue with fate. At midnight, he signs an order he will regret at 3 in the morning. At 4, he watches the first field report and pretends it tells him something definitive. What victory requires, more often than not, is the courage to be wrong quickly and adjust quicker. Across the front lines, music finds a way, a harmonica at dusk because dusk is honest, a choir in a ruined church at Christmas because the roof can be missing and the song's still whole, a violin in a hospital ward where the bow shakes more than the strings, and still the notes land. We tell ourselves music is frivolous in a time like this, but music is the proof that time still passes, and if time passes, the war is not forever. Now, about that phantom army I hinted at, imagine this: the enemy's best general looks at photographs, reports, decoded fragments that feel stolen, and all of them insist a massive force is amassing opposite a particular shore. Field kitchens leave smells where there are no mouths to feed. Dummy landing craft bob in estuaries like props waiting for their scene. Entire divisions exist in paperwork and paint. At night, trucks roll in circles to carve tracks where no troops will march. Radio operators chat convincingly with partners who are just kilometers of copper arranged to mimic life. Artists sculpt illusions. Sound engineers stage entire battalions with loudspeakers. If you're thinking, I would have fallen for it, that was the point. So did they. But deception doesn't work without restraint. The hardest thing in war is not to act, it's to make the other side act into your emptiness, to hold your breath while they inhale confidence, to let their certainty ripen until it's brittle, and then, only then, tap it. The tap can be as small as a Regiment moving left when the photos said they always move right, or as large as a fleet turning toward the coast. That was merely a rumor yesterday and will be a headline tomorrow. In cities far from any front, another kind of battle, ration books, scrap drives, soup lines that are equal parts sustenance and solidarity. Children learn the weight of tin in their pockets, the worth of rubber, the magic of a garden that squeezes carrots from a postage stamp of earth. People discover that saving isn't hoarding, it's reinforcements you can hold in your hand. Your grandmother learned to fix a heel because leather was really a strategy. Your grandfather learned to fix a carburetor because fuel was really a calendar. Ask your family what they remember: the sound of the siren, the taste of the bread, the color of the blackout curtains in the dark. Then there's medicine, that quiet offensive against entropy. Field surgeons invent techniques because they must. Nurses write letters for men whose hands now tremble. Someone figures out how to move blood further and faster. Someone else figures out how to keep infection from winning battles the bullets already lost. A medic runs toward the sound that everyone else instinctively runs from, and he calls that direction work. Across the war, borders blur between genius and luck. A patrol takes the wrong turn and discovers a weak flank. A bomber group misses the target and sets off a chain of consequences no one planned and everyone later swears was inevitable. The difference between a blunder and a masterstroke is often written after the fact by survivors with pens. Beware tidy stories, they are embalming fluid. This war is messy because people are, and yet, some moments land like a clean sentence: a city freed, a bridge held, a regiment arriving exactly when despair was about to take the hill. You can feel the air change then, feel it decide to be bearable again. Relief is a physical thing, you can pick it up like a bag and set it down gently when you're done. You see it on faces even covered in grime, that fraction of a second smile that says, "We are not ghosts today." Before we close this chapter, let me hand you one last thread to pull: a document stamped routine that wasn't, a memo about weather balloons that weren't balloons, a passport issued to a man who never existed and yet traveled more freely than most of us ever will. The war's last victories are won by patience and paperwork, by clerks who spell a name just wrong enough, by forgers who know that the best lies use cheap ink and correct grammar. When the gun's finally quiet, the files take over. Files tell the world what happened, who did it, and how we must not let any of it slip through our fingers. If this journey sparked a thought, if you want me to dive into the Ghost Army stagecraft, the code tables that bent a battle's arc, or the siege where a loaf of bread weighed more than gold, say it in the comments. Tell me which hidden corner of this war you want unboxed next, or share your family's story if you're willing. And if you want more of these untold angles, tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next reveal we've been building toward. Your comment could choose the very next secret we bring into the light. Here's a truth the maps won't admit: rivers remember, they remember every failed crossing, every sudden thaw, every engineer who stared too long and blinked. One night, upstream of an enemy listening post, assault boats slide into the water like secrets. The current is a negotiator with its own agenda. A flare blooms miles away, wrong place, wrong time, and every heart in every boat forgets how to beat for exactly 1 second. Then paddles whisper again. On the far bank, a private reaches mud that doesn't care what side he's on. The first rope goes taut, a bridge begins, so small you could step over it, so important you could write a campaign on it. Far behind them, in a room without windows, someone solves a problem of distance using coffee, string, and contempt for impossibility. Fuel must leap mountain ranges, spare parts must ignore borders, ammunition needs to arrive earlier than the battle that will consume it. It's a ballet of ugly miracles, engines cannibalized into other engines, crates that left a port labeled handles with care arriving splintered but somehow full. A lone mechanic who remembers an obsolete gasket because he once fixed his mother's mixer and the memory stuck. Strategy is a promise, logistics is the signature that makes it real. There are cities that learn to be two places at once, a target and a home. People hang laundry under shrapnel-pocked balconies because cloth has to dry and courage has to look normal. Teachers take attendance by candlelight. In the market, a vendor weighs apples like a priest lifting communion, knowing these might be the last apples for weeks. A girl chalks hopscotch squares in dust while a siren dozes. Childhood keeps insisting on happening. That insistence is its own kind of resistance. Let's open a file stamped with a code word and the quiet authority of a rubber stamp. Inside, a ledger of small deceptions, a bulldozer parked at an angle so aerial photos exaggerate its size, a rumor among dock workers seeded precisely 3 times and then allowed to grow wild. A weather station that transmits nothing but noise at regular intervals to convince eavesdroppers there's meaning. Deception is patient gardening. You plant enough plausible weeds and watch the enemy's certainty starve for light. At the polar edge of the war, steel cuts into water that behaves like stone. Submariners measure courage in cubic meters of air and minutes between pings. The ocean edits sentences without asking. The end of a story becomes the middle never arrives. Above, convoy escorts write their own luck with sonar sweeps, depth charge patterns, an intuition they'd never call by its name. A single degree on a compass, kept true through fatigue and fog, is the difference between a ship that delivers sugar and one that becomes a rumor. Now move south, where deserts teach armies how thirst negotiates with pride. A tank in sand is a contradiction on tracks. Heat argues with metal until both sulk. Navigation is a faith practiced with stars and guesswork. You learn to read shadows the way sailors read swells. Supply lines become lines of poetry. Spare, exact, unforgiving. You do not improvise water. You either have it or you are a story people tell later with a lowered voice. Let's talk about the airborne, the ones who step out of airplanes and trust silk. Night turns fields into puzzles, wind makes comedians of maps, a drop zone shifts by a mile, and suddenly a unit that trained together dies together in separate villages they can't pronounce, and yet, a lieutenant gathers 12 scattered strangers, becomes a captain for a day, and closes a road the enemy counted on. Fate adores audacity when audacity arrives with a plan and a wire cutter. In occupied neighborhoods, resistance looks like nothing until it's everything. A dressmaker who stitches messages into hems, a baker whose loaves hide wires coiled tighter than hunger, a barber who relays schedules while trimming hair he pretends not to recognize. Each act is a whisper added to a chorus that will be deafening at the perfect hour. The trick is to survive long enough to sing the last note. Medicine keeps inventing verbs the language didn't need before, to triage, to transfuse, to debride. The tent smells of antiseptic and iron. A surgeon mutters to instruments like a mechanic coaching an engine up a hill. Outside, a chaplain who hasn't slept in 30 hours learns he can bless and carry at the same time. A nurse writes one letter as if it came from two hands, the patient's and the future's, in a ledger somewhere. A chemist adds a decimal point in the right place and quietly gives 10,000 strangers the chance to see another spring on a mountain road. Mules do geometry that humbled trucks. They find balance where machinery finds excuses. A single crate of mortar shells, delivered to a ridge just before dawn, is a speech the enemy cannot interrupt. The bombardment that follows is not poetic, it is precise. Precision is the politeness of professionals who know what waste feels like. When armies move through valleys, the radio becomes weather, squalls of interference, clearings of signal. A message that matters riding atop a dozen that don't. The operator's ear grows a second skin. He hears intention in static, here's impatience in a pause, here's danger in a sender who always errs on the third character suddenly getting them all perfect. People tell you machines fight this war. People are wrong. People fight it through machines they've learned as intimately as their own pulse. In the East, the land itself is a participant. Summer is a gate that swings open. Winter is a gate that slams. Trains arrive or they don't. Roads exist or they pretend. An offensive that should bloom chokes on mud. A retreat that should collapse hardens into a stand because the frost makes the ground bear weight. When you read about vast fronts, remember, each kilometer is a day a man will never get back. Meanwhile, in a bell tower ripped from postcards, an observer counts flashes on the horizon and translates them into arithmetic of dread and duty. He radios coordinates that will age into footnotes. Notice his handwriting in the logbook. Neat at first, then hurried, then almost illegible. Then neat again when he realizes posterity might read. He steadies his pen, steadies his breath, steadies the war in the tiny way available to him. Factories pivot so fast the word impossible starts to feel shy. A plant that made toys now produces altitude valves. A plant that made bathtubs now spins propellers that won't forgive an error. Women who were told they had the wrong hands for heavy work discover the work is wrong about their hands. Slogans are painted over doorways because slogans help when sleep doesn't. Every shift change is a parade without music. Confetti made of metal shavings, cheers measured in throughput. There is a night, a specific one, with a date that won't make the front page. When a messenger arrives 5 minutes early, he has the wrong address by a single digit, knocks on the wrong door, and meets the right person anyway. They compare papers, they exchange a phrase and its counter-phrase. A plan leaps from imagination to calendar. Later, historians will argue about this moment. The people in it don't argue, they move. Let's tell a simple story about a complicated weapon. A new engine whispers that it wants colder air. A new wing insists on a different angle. A new gun sight demands a steadier hand. progress is not a staircase, it is a scaffolding improvised in a gale. Pilots test, curse, land, and write notes with the seriousness of philosophers on a test stand. An engineer listens not to noise but to the spaces between noises and hears a bearing that will fail in 7 hours. He saves a squadron with a screwdriver. There's a crossroads in a forest where a division will either arrive in time or make a whole district learn a new anthem. The road is clogged with the stubbornness of machinery and the reality of rain. A military policeman climbs on a truck and starts pointing like a conductor berating his orchestra into tempo. He swears like art. He invents lanes inside of lanes. He turns minutes into meters. By sunrise, the division is where the map begged it to be. No medals are minted for this. There should be. Codes evolve into conversations with personalities. An enemy encrypts poorly when a certain colonel is anxious, well when he's rested, brilliantly when he's lied to about the results of his previous dispatch. The code breakers learn the man through the machine. They predict his moods and exploit his habits, and then, after the war, some of them feel strange about knowing him so intimately without ever learning his name. Knowledge without faces sits heavy. Listen to the small etiquettes of survival, the way soldiers arrange boots so they can be pulled on in the dark, the way sailors secure mugs so a ship's roll doesn't add porcelain shrapnel to a bad day, the way aircrews leave a lucky pencil by the throttle though no one believes in luck out loud. These rituals aren't superstition, they're scaffolding. They hold up the part of the mind that must not collapse. Now, a moment when the sky chooses sides, a break in clouds that no forecast promised, a beam of sun that turns camouflage into confession, reconnaissance cameras drink detail at a feast, a battery that thought it was invisible learns otherwise, the correction comes over the net, 2 mils left, 1 short, fire for effect, and a hillside becomes smoke arguing with gravity, somewhere far away. A planner's improbable hope wins an arm wrestling match against probability and grins into a paper cup of coffee gone cold. In a cellar, archivists preserve what the war tries to cancel, paintings wrapped, books crated, a city's memory stacked and labeled by people who know exactly which pages would be burned first if the wrong boots climbed down the stairs. Culture fights with quiet stubbornness. When the guns go silent, these crates will be unwrapped like gifts from the past to the future, and entire neighborhoods will remember who they were. Armistice will someday arrive disguised as paperwork. Until then, the war answers questions no one wanted to ask. How much can a bridge hold? How far can a fighter range if the wind is unkind? How long can a mother pretend the letter will come tomorrow? Hidden in those answers are decisions that decide everything, like whether to risk a crossing now or wait for dawn, whether to burn a cache or trust you'll be back soon. We'll pull on one of those decisions so hard the timeline will tremble. Before we do, tell me which corner you want to illuminate. The night paratroopers landed in fields that fought back, the convoy that invented a route in the hours between 2 storms, the forged passport that outlived the man whose name it stole. Drop your pick in the comments below, and if you want the next chapter as soon as it's ready, the reveal of a choice so small it fit on a scrap of paper but big enough to bend a continent, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. Your comment might be the spark that decides which hidden gear we turn next. Here's the decision I promised to tug, a choice so small it almost vanished between 2 pages of a weather log. A room of men and 1 woman argue with barometers and clouds. The sea is an opinionated judge. One forecast says hold, another says go, and the sky refuses to sign either. Somewhere beyond that argument sit ships already packed with fear and steel. If you postpone, you risk the enemy noticing the weight you've gathered at the coast. If you proceed, you gamble lives on a window that could collapse into storm the moment you touch it. The decision lands like a coin on its edge, then tips. Orders sprint down ladders, through corridors, into hands that have been waiting for a single word. They get it, they move, but not every hinge is famous. Some creak in rooms with poor lighting and worse coffee. Picture a desk, an unremarkable brown envelope, and a dossier crafted with insultingly boring care. The name inside belongs to a man who never lived, and yet he carries official letters, a receipt for a purchase he never made, a photo of a fiancée who never waits for him. One morning, fishermen haul in more than nets. Papers travel across desks in a neutral port, then across other desks where neutrality means curiosity with a stamp. The general reads those papers and smiles at a conclusion planted for him months ago. Troops shift, guns pivot, and far away, an island shaped like a triangle wakes to a surprise from the sea because a ghost carried a lie perfectly. There are nights when a single flare is worth a brigade. In hedgerow country, darkness is a weapon you can borrow but never own. A patrol hears nothing, then hears everything: the scrape of a boot, a cartridge clink, A breath held too long, a sergeant draws a line in dirt with his finger. No one crosses it until he does. On the far side of a field, a farmhouse window glows for 3 seconds at an agreed time. That's not laziness with curtains, that's a signal. A lane is clear, a lane is death. The difference is 3 seconds, and a farmer brave enough to pretend he's careless. Across the ocean, steel islands carry airfields on their backs. Deck crews move like choreography you only learn by nearly losing a hand. Pilots sit inside engines and hope their courage idles at a steady RPM. A raid launches, radios chatter and then pretend to be silent to cheat distance. In the middle of blue and deeper blue, a squadron finds its target not because the map is right but because a navigator recognizes a reef shape he saw once at dawn and never forgot. He adjusts a pencil line by half a thumbnail, bomb racks open, a plan becomes a crater. The enemy's timetable, insulted, snarls and then slips. In the mountains, decisions are vertical. A pass takes you from autumn to winter in 20 minutes. A mule train insists on a pace that feels like patience but is really certainty. A colonel demands speed, the valley demands respect. The compromise is measured in switchbacks. At the summit, men look down at a road that will murder trucks and adopt mules as if they were promoted. Below, a river will try to veto the day's plan. Engineers unroll canvas, build a bridge that believes in itself, and tell the river to try harder tomorrow. There is a monastery on a hill, stones old enough to remember prayers before the war and stubborn enough to survive arguments made of explosives. Commanders squint at it through binoculars and see different things: a fortress, a landmark, a liability, an ally. Decisions here grow thorns. Intelligence is a rumor in a uniform. Civilians are everywhere and nowhere. A day arrives when the sky descends in metal. History takes notes in ash and then refuses to settle. The debate, the hill remains, the road below still matters. The war shrugs and moves 3 ridges west to argue again. On the eastern plains, time behaves badly. Summer sprints, winter drags, mud wins awards for persistence. A front line that looks like a straight edge on the map is in fact a coastline of uncertainty. In the morning, a village belongs to one army, by evening, to another, by midnight, to no one except the graves that do not travel. Trains shudder across bridges built to last an hour and confound historians by lasting the week. Somewhere in a headquarters hut that smells of felt and fatigue, a commander marks an arrow, then draws it again fatter, then sets down the pencil because the pencil's optimism is offensive to the weather. Inside a factory, a woman with oil under her nails measures tolerances with a grace that would embarrass a violinist. A rivet must go here and not there. A seam must forgive stress but not sloppiness. An inspector runs a fingertip along a fuselage and feels a confession no ledger will catch. Again, he says, but softly, because he understands that perfection is a negotiation with time. A week later, far away, a bomber returns on one engine and a superstition: its wing holds because of a fingertip that listened. Let's descend into the earth, where another front seethes, tunnels and mines, cables and charges, sappers who've learned to hear the difference between silence and the kind of silence that moves. Down here, a breath is expensive, a candle is a witness, an explosion above is a rumor that arrives late. Men scrape history with shovels and wire cutters. When they surface, they squint like prophets and shrug like laborious. A hill relocates from arrogance to ambiguity because its belly was persuaded to change sides. In a city under siege, calendars are jokes that stop being funny. Streets are renamed by shells. The baker opens when the flour says so. People trade recipes for soups that never existed before and, if mercy holds, never will again. A boy learns the quick math of survival: distance to shelter, time between whistles and thuds, the odds that the corner shop still owns candles. One afternoon, the air is strangely honest. No sirens, no timetables of terror. The city walks outside and breathes without counting. It remembers that it is a place and not just a pause between destructions. We should talk about the men who had to be wrong quickly. Staff work is a tyranny of abundance. Too many reports, too many possibilities, too many ways to be almost right. A major pushes markers across a map and hears the scrape like a warning. He approves a plan that will be obsolete by lunch and essential by dusk. His job is to be decisive and then to forgive himself with speed when the ground argues. When it goes well, he's anonymous. When it goes badly, he's a paragraph. The war is held together by people willing to be thankless. Some victories begin with insomnia. A radar operator refuses to blink, notes a blip that looks like a smudge, and calls it in anyway. A coast watcher on a lonely headland writes many lights on a damp page and then crosses out many to write too many. A code breaker stares at a sequence of letters that looks like noise until a childhood memory of The way her mother misspelled a word gives her the pattern. The next day, a convoy sails a different route through the night and arrives with sugar instead of silence. Remember the quiet courage we keep meeting. It wears new uniforms everywhere. A priest smuggles names in a hymnbook margin. A teacher assigns a composition titled What I Saw Today because she knows children will confess observations adults would hide. A conductor holds a train at a station for exactly 4 minutes longer than the schedule, and in those 4 minutes a passenger with a satchel that matters makes the platform. No medals are minted for timetables and homework, no matter. The war notices, here's an engine room truth, power is nothing without temperature. On a long climb, coolant is a prayer and airflow is theology. A crew chief decides to cut a panel and add a vent that the manual never mentioned. He signs his name on the inside of the cowling like a promise. Months later, in a far-off valley, a pilot who never heard that name survives a dogfight by the thickness of that vent. He will call it luck, it was craft. At sea, a convoy learns to be a single animal. Destroyers nip at the dark where wolves hide. Merchantmen hold formation like chess pieces that trust the board. A storm tries to convene chaos. Captains insist on order. Somewhere beneath them, patience made of rivets glides and waits for a mistake. A lead ship shifts by 1 degree. That degree is history. Depth charges tumble from rails with the finality of punctuation. When they speak, the ocean listens in bubbles and broken intentions. We keep circling the same lesson. The war tilts on choices that look small from far away and enormous up close. So here is another. A field kitchen sets up 300 meters left of where it planned. Soldiers eat 10 minutes earlier than they would have. When the shelling starts, the place where they were supposed to be is torn open like a letter. A corporal cleaning a ladle goes still. He looks at the cook as if the cook knew, but the cook only knew soup. Later, neither of them will know what to do with that gratitude. Soon, we'll pull at a final thread that runs from a basement laboratory to a desert glare to a city that woke up ordinary and went to sleep rewritten. Before we do, tell me, do you want the next chapter to walk through the day a fake identity fooled an entire army, step by step, or to climb into the cloud rooms where weather decided who lived and who tried again tomorrow? Drop your choice in the comments, and if this journey still has you hooked, if you want that last reveal, the one that ties science to strategy to a door only a handful of people were allowed to open, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. Your comment will decide which fuse we light first. Let's climb into the weather rooms first, the cloud-choked cathedrals where the war met the atmosphere and argued, chalk dust on sleeves, isobars curling like question marks. A forecaster taps a chart and says, if this ridge holds, ships live. If another replies, if it breaks, men drown. They're not guessing, they're gambling with skill. Outside, trucks idle, decks creak, and entire operations crouch at the doorway of a sky that can't make up its mind. You think war is steel, war is timing. Down a corridor and 4 locks deeper, science sharpens into secrecy. A basement lab hums with improvisation. Kettles become condensers. Filing cabinets become Faraday cages. Problems become invitations. Someone writes an equation and underlines it twice, not because it's elegant but because it's dangerous. The chain reaction is a story the nucleus tells if you eavesdrop correctly, and then force it to speak louder than any city can bear. Funding arrives wrapped in silence. Badges become passports to a mountain nobody can visit unless they already live there. Los Alamos, a town that didn't exist until it did. Mail addressed to nowhere. New neighbors who never say what they do. Sand carries rumors like pollen. Engineers talk to metals the way violinists talk to strings. Explosives stop being blasts and start being geometry, symmetry. Someone says, and the room goes quiet because the word isn't philosophical anymore. It's a demand. Lenses of explosive must focus a shockwave like a camera focuses light. Close isn't close enough. Scenes frown at sloppy. The desert watches every rehearsal and says nothing. Across the Atlantic, deception keeps humming. The ghost division still breathe on paper. Inflatable tanks nap in fields and wake in photographs. Radio nets chatter their counterfeit hearts out, convincing an enemy that certainty is a comfortable chair. The trick isn't to fool once, it's to fool so consistently that truth begins to look like the forgery. And while the enemy stares at the painted door, the real hinge turns somewhere else, in a coastal cottage plastered with weather maps. A meteorologist redraws a front and swears the pencil feels heavier today. He circles a window so narrow you could miss it by blinking. He doesn't know that his circle is an arrow someone far away will follow through fog and flak. He only knows the air is planning mischief and that for 4 hours it might be too polite to try. Back in the desert, a device waits under canvas, a patient whose heart hasn't been installed. Workers are careful in a way that looks slow but beats fast. A technician checks a solder joint and thinks of a kitchen radio from childhood, the one that whined. Between stations, he wants this to find one station only, the one labeled works. If another crew fits detonators that must all agree, an orchestra tuned to violence, a physicist jokes at midnight and no one laughs because it's tomorrow's dawn now and the joke is heavier than the air. Trinity, dawn that thinks it's night, a countdown that would be poetry if it weren't so practical, eyes shielded, backs turned, hearts disobedient. The switch is not a single finger, it's 100 decisions stacked. Into inevitability, light arrives before sound, a new continent rising where there used to be plain, throats forget how to swallow, sand decides it will be glass today, far away, a notebook waits for the word successful, and the pencil hovers like a priest over water. Success is a door, and doors invite choices. A target committee meets with maps and ethics in the same folder, airfields, factories, rail hubs, each a noun with a population inside. Weather enters the room without knocking, cloud. Cover is more than inconvenience, it's destiny with a soft voice. A list narrows, a date is picked because war respects calendars even when it lies to clocks. Somewhere in a barracks, a crew receives a mission brief that sounds like any other, and isn't. Consider the plane that takes off because the wind said yes. Consider the city that expected lunchtime and received history instead. Consider the morning that wore ordinary clothes and the night that didn't, a glare bigger than conclusions. A shock wave that argues with windows and winds. After a silence thick as wet concrete, the debate begins immediately and is still not over. Strategy counts bridges, morality counts chairs left empty, the ledger fills with numbers, the heart refuses to read them without names. Now listen to a smaller hinge with a long shadow, weather over Kokura, clouds where a bomb site wanted clarity, circles flown, fuel considered, a course adjusted, a city spared by vapor and timing, another chosen by necessity's arithmetic, streets that would have been statistics remained addresses, streets that were addresses became lessons. History is sometimes nothing more than a pilot's second attempt and a sky's first refusal. The war nears its paperwork, flags drop, then rise, then change. Colors like seasons, a surrender is ink and ceremony, a trial is testimony and a mirror. Files walk out of vaults and into daylight. Some truths arrive with stamps, some with scars. In schools, chalk finds new words, reconstruction, rationing, return. In homes, chairs remember who's missing. Grief becomes a gardener, persistent and unglamorous. It pulls weeds, keeps planting, insists on flowers because it must. Factories don't go quiet, they change their minds. Tools that made wings now make bicycles, assembly lines that birthed engines now adopt washing machines. Women who proved they could do everything are told they don't have to anymore, and some of them smile, and some of them don't. In fields, farmers unearth metal where potatoes should be and call it archaeology with sore backs. In cities, scaffolding blooms like optimistic vines. The world starts learning how to be a home again. Not everyone comes back, not everyone who comes back returns. A man walks through his front door and talks less because words have too many rooms in them. A woman reads a letter again because memory is kinder on the second pass. Children ask simple questions that adults answer with weather. We say post-war as if the past and future signed a treaty. They didn't. They stare at each other across a table and learn to share. And yet, listen, radios learn to play music before the news. Markets smell like fruit again. Weddings are suddenly frequent. A first laugh echoes in a kitchen that forgot the sound. A teacher writes the date on a blackboard for a class that finally fits in one room. A factory whistle means shift again, not air raid. From the small things, the big thing grows back. Normal, what remains? The lesson that the smallest hinge can swing the heaviest door. A forecast whispered at midnight, a forged dossier folded into a pocket, a rivet tightened by a hand that never knew the pilot's name, a cloud that drifted where a crosshair insisted it shouldn't. Strategy is grand, but history is granular. We live in the granules, so tell me which granule to pick up next. Do you want the anatomy of the desert morning, step by step? From lenses and initiators to the exact moment light outran sound. Do you want the full anatomy of a deception so convincing entire armies saluted a ghost? Or should we walk a single city street on the day the war arrived uninvited and map every choice a family had to make before dusk? Drop your choice in the comments and share any story your family passed down. Those are the threads that keep this tapestry honest, and if this journey kept you listening, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapter we unearth together. Your comment may be the compass for where we go next.